Ever feel like your conscious experience, that like feeling of you inside your head, is like the biggest mystery in the universe?
Yeah,
Well, you're not alone.
for sure.
Today we're diving into a paper by Roger Penrose and Stuart Hameroff
Okay.
that tried to tackle this mystery kind of head on.
Interesting.
It's called Consciousness in the Universe, Neuroscience, Quantum Spacetime Geometry, and Orch-OR Theory.
Touchy title.
And it's dense,
I bet.
to say the least.
Yeah.
But trust me, it's worth the effort.
I'm ready.
Because it connects some of the most mind-boggling concepts.
Like?
Our own awareness, the weirdness of quantum mechanics,
Right.
and even the structure of the universe itself.
Wow, so it's challenging the standard idea that consciousness just emerges from the complexity of the brain, like a computer program becoming self-aware.
Yeah. Penrose and Hameroff propose something much more radical.
Okay, I'm listening.
They suggest that consciousness might be woven into the fabric of reality itself, perhaps as like a fundamental property of the universe.
So it's not just that our brains are complex enough to generate consciousness,
Right.
but that consciousness in some form has always been there.
That's a huge shift in perspective.
Absolutely. Their theory, called orchestrated objective reduction, or Orch-OR for short,
Orch-OR, got it.
suggests that the building blocks of consciousness might have existed long before brains even evolved,
Wow.
and that biology essentially found a way to tap into them.
Okay, I'm intrigued, but where do we even begin to unpack this?
Well, think about the hard problem of consciousness.
Okay.
The mystery of why subjective experience, why it feels like something.
Right, right.
Why do we have qualia, those unique experiences of colors, sounds, emotions?
Yeah,
The standard brain-as-computer model really struggles with this.
I can see that.
It can explain how our brains process information,
Sure.
but it doesn't explain the feeling of what it's like to be conscious.
It's like saying, here's how a computer simulates the color red. But that doesn't tell us what it's like to actually see red, to have that subjective experience of redness.
Exactly. And there are other issues the standard model has trouble explaining, like how do all the different activities in the brain come together to form a single unified experience?
Yeah.
That's called the binding problem.
Okay.
And what about the role of consciousness in actions and free will? Not to mention single-celled organisms that display complex behavior without anything resembling a brain.
So are we saying that those tiny organisms might have some kind of rudimentary consciousness?
That's one possibility.
Wow.
But the point is the traditional model doesn't have all the answers.
Okay.
Orch-OR tries to fill in the gaps by bringing in quantum mechanics,
Okay.
which is where things get really interesting and maybe a little mind-bending.
I'm game if it helps us understand this whole consciousness thing.
Right.
But quantum mechanics always felt like this mysterious realm where things behave in ways that defy common sense.
It is strange.
Yeah.
But stick with me. Remember a few key concepts. Superposition,
Okay.
where things can exist in multiple states at once.
Right.
Entanglement, that spooky connection between particles even at a distance. And wave function collapse,
Okay.
the mysterious process that turns those quantum possibilities into definite realities.
Ah, like Schrodinger's cat.
Yes.
Both dead and alive until someone opens the box. That always seemed more like a paradox than a real possibility.
It was Schrodinger's way of pointing out the absurdity of applying quantum mechanics directly to the everyday world.
Okay.
He was highlighting the mystery of how those quantum possibilities turn into the concrete reality we experience.
Okay, so how does Orch bridge that gap?
Well, Penrose proposes a solution called objective reduction, or. Imagine there's a threshold built into the fabric of space-time itself. When a quantum system gets too weird, too spread out in its possibilities,
Okay.
the threshold triggers a collapse of the wave function, forcing it to choose a single state.
So it's not observation that causes the collapse,
Right.
like in some interpretations of quantum mechanics, but something built into space-time itself.
Exactly. And here's where things get really interesting.
Okay.
Orch-OR suggests that this OR process isn't happening just anywhere,
Right.
but within tiny structures inside our very cells called microtubules.
Microtubules. I vaguely remember those from biology class. They're like the scaffolding inside cells.
Yeah.
I never imagined they could be involved in something as profound as consciousness.
That's what makes Orch-OR so radical. It takes these seemingly mundane protein polymers, which form the cytoskeleton of cells,
Right.
and elevates them to potential sites of quantum computation.
Wait, so those tiny tubes inside our cells could be like mini quantum computers.
That's the idea.
Wow.
Microtubules, especially in neurons, do much more than just provide structural support. They orchestrate cell division, movement, and even the complex behavior of single-celled organisms like the paramecium.
You mentioned paramecium.
Yeah.
Are we saying those tiny creatures might be using quantum computations to navigate their world?
It's a possibility that Orch-OR opens up.
Okay.
And consider this. The paper suggests that the computational capacity of microtubules could dwarf current estimates for artificial intelligence.
Wow.
We're talking about each neuron potentially performing trillions of operations per second.
Yeah.
Comparable to some entire AI systems.
That's staggering. It really challenges our assumptions about where information processing happens in the brain.
It does.
But how does all this connect to our experience, to the feeling of what it's like to be conscious?
That's where the orchestrated part of Orch-OR comes in.
Okay.
But to understand that, we need to dive a bit deeper into how Penrose's objective reduction works.
Right.
And how it relates to a different kind of quantum gravity than what you might normally hear about.
Okay. You've definitely piqued my curiosity.
Good.
Let's dive in.
Okay, so imagine you have two kids on a seesaw.
Okay.
That's kind of like a quantum superposition.
Right.
The seesaw can be balanced in the middle.
Or tilted one way or the other.
Okay.
In Penrose's view,
Yep.
gravity plays a role in deciding which way the seesaw tips.
So gravity is like the ultimate decision maker in the quantum world.
Not exactly. It's more like gravity introduces a tiny bit of wobble into the system,
Okay.
making it unstable. Eventually, that wobble gets big enough to force the seesaw to tip one way or the other.
Yeah.
That's the objective reduction, the collapse of the wave function.
I see. So gravity isn't causing the collapse. It's more like it's making those quantum possibilities a bit fuzzy.
Right.
So they can't stay in superposition forever.
Precisely. And here's the key difference from the usual quantum gravity you might hear about,
Okay.
which focuses on things like black holes and the very early universe.
Yeah.
Or Orch-OR is talking about a much more subtle effect of gravity,
Okay.
operating at the level of these tiny mass displacements in the microtubules.
Okay, so how do microtubules fit into this quantum seesaw picture?
We'll picture the microtubules as a network of interconnected seesaws.
All wobbling around due to those tiny gravitational effects.
Okay.
And each time a seesaw tips, it sends a signal through the network, influencing other microtubules.
So it's like a chain reaction of quantum collapses happening inside our neurons.
That's the essence of Orch-OR.
Okay.
And the really mind-blowing part is that these quantum collapses, these orchestrated objective reductions, are what Penrose and Hameroff believe give rise to conscious moments.
Wait, so each moment of awareness, each thought, each feeling is the result of a cascade of these quantum collapses happening in our brains.
That's the theory, and it gets even weirder.
Okay.
Orch-OR suggests that there's a mathematical relationship between the time between these conscious moments and the amount of mass involved in the superposition.
Okay.
Basically, the more stuff is involved in the quantum wobble, the faster those seesaws tip, and the more frequent our conscious moments become.
So someone with a more active quantum mind would have more conscious moments per second.
That's what Orch-OR suggests.
That's a wild thought. Does this relate to brainwaves at all?
Possibly.
Like those 40 hertz gamma waves that are often associated with consciousness.
Remember we mentioned Tibetan monks in deep meditation who show 80 hertz gamma synchrony?
Yeah. So are they having twice as many conscious moments per second? Is that what makes their meditation so intense?
Orch-OR would suggest that's a possibility.
Okay.
It opens up this idea that there might be different levels of consciousness, different speeds of subjective experience, depending on how much brain matter is involved in these quantum collapses.
That's pretty mind-blowing. But hold on.
Yeah.
If quantum states are so fragile, easily disrupted by noise, how can these delicate superpositions survive in the warm, wet, chaotic environment of the brain?
Yeah.
Isn't that the decoherence problem?
That's the million-dollar question.
Yeah.
And it's one that critics of Orch-OR often bring up.
I bet.
You're right, quantum computers need extreme cold and isolation to function. But Penrose and Hameroff argue that microtubules might have some tricks up their sleeves to shield those quantum states.
Like what? Do they have tiny refrigerators inside them?
Not quite. They propose a few mechanisms. One is something called Froelich resonance.
Froelich resonance.
Where biomolecules can vibrate in sync like a chorus of tiny tuning forks. This synchronized energy could help keep the microtubules in a coherent state, resisting decoherence.
So it's like they're constantly being pumped with energy to stay in that quantum realm.
Exactly. And there might be other factors at play, too.
Okay.
The ordered structure of water molecules around the microtubules could act as a kind of shield. And there are even tiny hydrophobic pockets inside the tubulin proteins themselves.
Yeah.
Like little isolated chambers where quantum states could hide out.
So it's like a multi-layered defense system to protect those precious quantum states.
Exactly.
It's amazing to think that something so fundamental to our conscious experience might be happening at such a tiny hidden scale.
And here's another intriguing connection.
Okay.
Researchers are exploring high-temperature superconductors, materials that can maintain quantum coherence at surprisingly warm temperatures.
Yeah.
While these temperatures are still far below body temperature,
Okay.
it hints at the possibility that similar mechanisms might be protecting those quantum states in the brain.
It's like nature might have figured out quantum computing long before we did,
Right.
using tricks we're only just beginning to understand.
That's the beauty of exploring these kinds of ideas.
Yeah.
It opens up whole new avenues of research.
Sure.
But even with all this potential for quantum computation happening inside neurons,
Right.
the big question remains, how does it connect to the brain's electrical signals?
Right.
To the way neurons communicate and ultimately influence our behavior?
Right. How do we go from quantum collapses in microtubules to the firing of neurons to me deciding to reach for that cup of coffee?
That's where the orchestrated part of Orch-OR really comes into play.
Nope.
But to understand that, we need to look at a rather perplexing experiment
Okay.
that has baffled neuroscientists for decades.
Hmm.
Libet's backwards time referral.
Ooh, that sounds intriguing. What is backwards time referral?
Well, think about making a simple decision, like
Yeah.
raising your hand.
Yeah.
It feels like you consciously decide to do it, and then your hand moves, right?
Right.
But Benjamin Libet did some experiments in the 1980s
Okay.
that challenged this intuitive notion of how decisions work. He found that there's a buildup of brain activity related to the action
Yeah.
before we're consciously aware of making the decision.
So my brain is already preparing to raise my hand before I even consciously decide to do it.
It seems that way.
That's a bit unnerving.
It is, and it raises all sorts of questions about free will and the nature of conscious control.
Yeah.
But here's where Orch-OR offers a potential explanation.
Okay.
If consciousness arises from these quantum collapses, which themselves might operate outside of our normal linear understanding of time.
You're saying that our experience of time might be a bit wonky,
Yeah.
a bit more flexible than we usually think.
Exactly. Those quantum processes, especially entanglement,
Yeah.
seem to have this strange ability to influence events in a way that transcends our usual notions of cause and effect,
Okay.
even time itself.
So maybe our conscious experience of making a decision isn't happening in a strict linear sequence.
Right.
Like a line of dominoes fall.
Exactly.
Maybe it's more like a symphony with different instruments playing their parts.
Yeah.
Some a little ahead of the beat, some a little behind,
Right.
but all contributing to the overall harmony.
That's a beautiful analogy.
Thanks.
And it's in this orchestration that we might find the answer to how quantum events in microtubules can influence the behavior of neurons
Yeah.
and ultimately shape our conscious experience of the world. But of course, a theory as bold as this is bound to attract criticism.
For sure.
And Orch-OR is no exception.
Yeah, it seems like every time someone tries to explain consciousness, there's a whole chorus of skeptics ready to poke holes in their ideas.
That's true.
What are some of the main criticisms leveled at Orch-OR?
Oh, there are quite a few.
Okay.
Some argue that the gravitational energy involved in the objective reduction is far too weak to have any meaningful impact on the protein states of tubulin.
Yeah.
Others question whether those delicate quantum states can really survive the decoherence problem,
Right.
especially given that even our most advanced quantum computers need extreme cold and isolation to function.
It does seem like a big leap to go from those tiny quantum events in microtubules to something as complex and dynamic as consciousness.
It is?
How do proponents of Orch-OR respond to these criticisms?
Well, they point out that many of the criticisms are based on assumptions that don't align with the specifics of Orch-OR. For example, the argument about gravitational energy being too weak often assumes a much larger separation between superposed states than the theory proposes. When you factor in the actual scale of those superpositions, the gravitational effects become much more significant.
So it's all about the scale.
Yes.
About those tiny quantum dances happening within the microtubules.
Exactly. And as for the decoherence problem,
Yeah.
remember those shielding mechanisms we discussed earlier?
The Froelich resonance.
Yes.
The ordered water environment. Those hydrophobic pockets.
Those could be playing a crucial role in protecting those delicate quantum states.
It's fascinating to think that these tiny structures inside our cells might have evolved these intricate mechanisms to harness the power of quantum mechanics.
It is.
And there's even some evidence from experiments with high-temperature superconductors that suggests similar mechanisms might be at play.
Right.
So the idea that quantum processes could be happening in the warm, wet environment of the brain might not be as far-fetched as it first seems.
That's what Orch-OR proposes.
Okay.
But there are other criticisms, too.
Like?
Some focusing on specific details of the model.
Yeah.
Others questioning whether it can really account for all the complexities of consciousness.
Well, let's dive into some of those criticisms and see how Orch-OR stands up to scrutiny.
Yeah.
Okay, let's unpack some of these criticisms.
Yeah.
You mentioned one about a drug called colchicine
Mm-hmm.
that disrupts microtubules.
Mm-hmm.
If microtubules are so important for consciousness,
Right.
wouldn't messing with them have a big effect?
You might think so.
Yeah.
But there's a catch.
Okay.
Colchicine doesn't actually cross the blood-brain barrier, so it can't reach the microtubules in the brain.
So it's not really a valid criticism then.
Not really, no.
It's like trying to deliver a pizza to the wrong address.
Exactly.
It doesn't matter how good the pizza is if it doesn't get to the right place.
Right.
Okay, what about other objections?
Hmm.
Some physicists argue that even if quantum states could exist in microtubules,
Yeah.
they wouldn't last long enough to do anything meaningful.
That's the decoherence problem again. One prominent critic, Max Tegmark,
Tegmark, okay.
calculated that those quantum states would collapse way too fast.
Yeah.
Like within a fraction of a nanosecond.
That doesn't leave much time for computation, let alone consciousness.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But here's the thing.
Okay.
Tegmark used assumptions
Yeah.
that don't match up with how Orch-OR actually works.
Okay.
He pictured those superposed states being much farther apart than the theory proposes.
So it's like he was using a yardstick to measure something the size of an atom.
That's a good analogy.
Yeah.
When you use the right scale,
Right.
the scale of those tiny atomic nuclei,
Okay.
those decoherence times become much longer,
Mm.
potentially long enough for those quantum computations to take place.
So the decoherence problem might not be a deal breaker after all.
Maybe not.
Okay, what about the other criticisms? I remember you mentioned something about a thought experiment with Schrödinger's cat.
Ah, yes, that was from neuroscientists Christoph Koch and Klaus Hepp.
Koch and Hepp, okay?
They imagined someone looking at Schrödinger's cat,
Right.
both dead and alive,
Okay.
with one eye while the other eye was distracted.
Okay.
Their question was, where in the brain would the wave function collapse?
So they were trying to pinpoint the exact location of consciousness in the brain.
Right, but their thought experiment assumed that consciousness causes the collapse. Like in some interpretations of quantum mechanics.
Okay.
But Orch-OR takes a different stance. It says consciousness is the collapse.
Okay.
That orchestrated objective reduction happening within the microtubules.
So it's not about finding the consciousness spot in the brain,
No.
but understanding how these quantum collapses are happening throughout the brain,
Right.
all orchestrated together.
Exactly. And those gap junctions,
Gap junctions, yeah.
the channels that connect neurons, could be playing a key role in this orchestration.
How so?
They allow not only electrical signals to pass between neurons,
Right.
but also for quantum states to spread.
So it's like those gap junctions are creating a network,
Yeah.
a sort of quantum internet
Right.
within the brain,
Right.
allowing those orchestrated collapses to influence larger scale activity.
That's a great way to think about it.
Okay, but the criticisms don't stop there.
No, they don't.
Some argue that the tubulin switching,
Yeah.
those changes in protein states that drive the computations,
Right.
would require too much energy
Yeah.
and generate too much heat.
That was one of the early criticisms.
Yeah, that was one of my concerns too. Wouldn't all that quantum activity turn our brains into little ovens?
Well, that's based on the misconception that each tubulin switch involves a major shape change,
Okay.
a big energy-guzzling process.
Right.
But Orch-OR suggests that these switches are much more subtle,
Okay.
more like tiny shifts in the distribution of electric charge within the molecule.
So it's more like a little quantum jiggle than a full-blown protein gymnastics routine.
Exactly. And those tiny jiggles don't require much energy at all.
Yeah.
Certainly not enough to overheat the brain.
Good.
Remember, the brain already consumes a huge amount of energy.
It does.
Mostly for things like neuronal firing
Right.
and maintaining ion gradients.
Hmm.
Those are the real energy hogs, not those subtle tubulin switches.
Okay, that makes me feel better. It seems like Orch-OR has a response for almost every criticism.
It does seem that way.
But even if we accept that the theory is plausible, where does it leave us?
Good question.
What are the implications of all this for our understanding of consciousness?
Well, for starters, it suggests that consciousness might be much more fundamental than we previously thought. Not just an emergent property of complex brains,
Right.
but potentially woven into the very fabric of the universe.
So instead of consciousness being this rare accidental phenomenon,
Yeah.
it could be everywhere, a basic ingredient of reality itself.
That's one of the mind-blowing possibilities that Orch-OR opens up.
It really is.
And if that's true,
Yeah.
then maybe our brains aren't so much generating consciousness.
Right. As tapping into it.
Yeah.
Like radios tuning into a universal broadcast.
That's an amazing image. And it makes you wonder what other forms of consciousness might be out there in the universe,
Yeah.
experiencing reality in ways we can't even imagine.
Exactly.
Wow.
The paper even speculates about the possibility of radically different forms of consciousness existing in places like neutron stars.
Neutron stars.
Yeah.
Wow.
Where the gravitational effects are incredibly intense.
Uh,
Those environments could lead to much faster objective reduction,
yeah.
creating conscious experiences that are far more rapid and intense than anything we know.
It's incredible to think that a theory about something as personal as our own awareness could have such profound implications for our understanding of the universe.
It's pretty remarkable.
And it even connects to the anthropic principle.
Yes.
The idea that the universe seems fine-tuned for the emergence of life and consciousness. Maybe those constants of nature aren't just a lucky coincidence, but a reflection of a deeper connection between consciousness and the physical laws governing the cosmos.
That's one way to look at it.
So instead of consciousness being an accidental byproduct of the universe, it might be playing a role in shaping the universe itself.
It's a pretty radical idea, but one worth considering.
It definitely is.
And it takes us beyond the traditional debate about whether the universe is for us or simply indifferent to our existence.
Right.
Maybe it's something more subtle and complex,
Yeah.
a kind of interconnected dance between consciousness and the cosmos.
It's definitely given me a lot to ponder.
I can imagine.
But before we wrap up, I have to ask about one more mind-boggling idea that Penrose proposes,
Oh, yeah.
his conformal cyclic cosmology theory, or CCC.
Ah, yes. The idea that our universe is just one in an endless cycle of eons,
Eons.
each with its own Big Bang and expansion. It's like a cosmic reincarnation,
Oh, wow.
with each universe being born from the ashes of the previous one.
And what's really intriguing is that CCC suggests that information,
Yeah.
including potentially the remnants of consciousness from previous eons, could be encoded in the cosmic microwave background radiation,
Right.
that faint afterglow of the Big Bang.
That's what he suggests.
So our universe might be carrying the echoes of consciousness from past cycles of creation.
It's certainly a thought-provoking idea.
Wow, that's really pushing the boundaries of what we can even conceive of.
Yes.
But even if we don't have all the answers yet,
Yeah.
it's clear that Orch-OR offers a completely new way of thinking about consciousness, the brain,
Yeah,
and the universe itself.
I agree.
It challenges us to question our assumptions,
Right.
to embrace uncertainty,
Yeah,
and to wonder at the mysteries that still lie beyond our grasp.
absolutely.
Well, we've certainly taken a deep dive today,
I think it's safe to say that.
exploring some truly mind-bending ideas.
For sure.
I'm left with a sense of awe and wonder.
That's great.
And I have to admit a bit of a headache, too.
That's understandable. It's a lot to take in.
So as we conclude our deep dive into Orch-OR,
Right.
I'm left with one final thought-provoking question for you, dear listener.
Okay.
If Orch-OR is correct, and consciousness is woven into the very fabric of the universe, what does that mean for our understanding of ourselves, our place in the cosmos, and the nature of reality itself? It's a question worth pondering, and I encourage you to continue exploring this fascinating field and to share your own thoughts and insights. Until next time, keep seeking, keep questioning, and keep diving deep.